Please welcome Mr. Dan Mall to the Hang Time stage.
How you doing? Let's do a little bit of housekeeping. All of you have really great badges on right now that have your names on them and have the schedule on them. Right now, they're not doing anybody any good, just sitting on your cute little tum-tums. So what I'd like you to do is, badges are not for you. Badges are actually for other people to know who you are. So what I'd like you to do is when you're sitting down, just pick up your badge for me and spin it around, right? And let it hang off the back of your neck. That way the people behind you get to know who you are and at least know your name when they introduce themselves to you afterwards. Cool. All right, this is all a grand experiment. We'll see how it goes. All right, thanks for doing all that. How many people here have thought this thought sometime recently? I'm good. You don't have to raise your hand or anything. Just think about whether or not this is you. Now, this could be for a couple of reasons, right? It could be you cranked out a comp, and you're like, man, I'm really good. It could be a coworker came up to you, and they said, hey, could you do this extra work that will require you to work some nights and weekends? You're like, nah, I'm good. Maybe you lent a coworker some cash, and you're like, I am a good person. Anybody experience that? You don't have to raise your hand. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how to be good at work. And some of the things that Mark talked about it's hard to do some of these things. We're going to talk about all of that. We're not going to talk about design or tweening or animations or development or code or any of that stuff. We're going to talk about all the stuff around that actually makes people good at work. There's a great Gallup poll that, with an article that's called The World's Broken Workplace. And in this article, they suggest here that 15% of the world's 1 billion workers are engaged at work. Only 15%. It's really sad. Right? In fact, they go so far as to say, we are in a worldwide employee engagement crisis. And what that probably means is that 15% of the people in this room are satisfied with their jobs, and the other 85% are not. Right? In any given room. So what do we do to change that? Well, some of you may have heard of this project. It's called Project Aristotle. The New York Times wrote a great article about it. And this article is about how Google did an experiment and did a study to find out what makes for effective teams at Google. And then they wrote up their findings. And so the lead researcher, Julia Rosowski, she basically says, we had this hypothesis that what makes for a good team is like, I don't know, you just have like good senior people on a team, and you have the right mix of people, and that's probably what makes for a good team, right? Actually, they found something very different. One of the things that they found is that it's not really the people on the team that matter, but it's actually how the team members interact. That's what makes for good teams. How they structure the work, how they view their contributions, that's what actually makes for really good teams, right? And the main premise of that is that the teams that provided psychological safety for all the team members are the ones that did the best. So we're going to talk about that. How do you create this psychological safety? And when I say best, what I mean is that they got more work done, they were happier with their jobs, and executives rated them twice as effective as all of their other coworkers. So how do you do that, right? So some of you are probably thinking like, yeah, that sounds like my team, right? It sounds like my team at work, like I'm free to experiment and explore ideas and fail. And then probably others of you are thinking like, that sounds like a dream. That sounds like that would be great, where I'm not afraid of failing, I'm not afraid of getting fired, I'm not afraid of getting chastised or written up or any of that kind of stuff. Right? So how do we do that? How do we move toward a place where you can create psychological safety, maybe for yourself and other team members, if your managers, your bosses, your clients are not creating it for you? Well, I think the way to start that is by establishing good boundaries. I'm going to talk about that for a minute. This here is a map of it's an overhead shot of an average house, right? It's probably what your house looks like and my house looks like, right? Yeah, probably. Okay, so if we do a little overlay on this house, what you'll see here is, this pink area is the house. Right, I'm probably not teaching you anything new, right? Whatever's in the pink is the house. Whatever's within these walls are part of the house. Whatever's outside of these walls are not part of the house. I don't think I'm blowing any minds here, right? And so, but your property is even more than this. It's not just the house. If we look at here, this area in yellow, this is your property, right? So this includes the house, everything in it, and also the stuff that's outside of it. It might be your pool. It might be the deck for your boat or your yacht, naturally. right? All of these things are your property. And the boundary here is clear. You, as the owner of the house, you get to decide who comes onto your property, right? People can hang out on the sidewalk, they can hang out in the lake or the river behind your house, but they can't come onto your property, right? You get to decide that. If they do come onto your property, you might enlist some help. You might tell them to leave. You might enlist some help getting them to leave by maybe your friends that have lots of muscles or the police, right? You get to decide that because it's your house, because you know the boundaries completely. There it is, right? So you know who can cross this. So really what this means, this works emotionally too, is that there is you, right, and all of the things that you hold sacred, your ideas, your output, your execution, right, and you have boundaries too, and then there's everybody else. And there's distance between you and everybody else, and you get to decide who encroaches on your boundaries and who doesn't. When somebody touches you unknowingly or unwillingly, you don't want them to do that, they're crossing your boundaries, right? And that's a very obvious example. But there are some more subtle examples that we're all prone to and subject to, right? When mom and dad guilt you into visiting because you got to be a good kid, right? That's crossing your boundaries. That's crossing some emotional space, right? You didn't decide that, you were guilted into it. So how do you create better boundaries at work, right? This happens with coworkers too, especially with managers and power structures there. So how do you deal with that? What do you do to actually solve these problems? Well, fortunately, there's some really good resources that can help us. And I'll share some insights from some of these resources. One of my favorites is this book, aptly titled Boundaries. Right? It helps you with boundaries. It's written by Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend, who are both clinical psychologists. And they help talk about how you can keep you sacred and how you can keep everybody else interacting with you in the way that you want to. If you prefer sort of the business version of this, there are business versions too, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But the basic premise is this: boundaries let the good in and keep the bad out. It's kind of an obvious statement, right? Think about it in terms of your house. It lets the good in, your friends, the people that you want to be in your house, the people you want to congregate with, and keeps your enemies out, or your weird neighbors, or the family that you don't want to come over. It keeps those out. So that's the basic concept of boundaries. If you are interested in the business version of this, there's another book that's kind of a variation on it called Boundaries for Leaders, right? So if you manage a team and want to help create good boundaries for your team members, Boundaries for Leaders is kind of a nice spin on that book personally. There's another book, which is great. Another great resource is Nina Brown's Coping with Infuriating, Mean, Critical People. Right? And in this book, Nina Brown talks about boundaries as well. So let's go over the type of boundaries that people can have. In this book, Nina Brown breaks it down really nicely. There are really 4 types of boundaries. So here's the first type. The first type is soft boundaries. Right? And soft boundaries are kind of when your boundaries merge with somebody else's, right? And these are usually people who are victims of psychological manipulation, right? If you have soft boundaries, people can easily talk you into things. You're maybe easily gullible, and so you want to strive to not have very soft boundaries, right? And then kind of related to that over here on the top right is spongy boundaries, right? You're really unsure of what to let in and what to keep out, right? And so again, that's kind of a variation on soft. Now, on the total opposite end of the spectrum is rigid boundaries. And you don't want to have those either. You don't want to be too hard to people. Like, you don't want to be so hard that nothing gets in, right? Like, you won't listen to people's ideas. You won't be cooperative. You won't work well with people. You're closed or walled off. And a lot of people that have had some sort of physical or emotional trauma actually end up developing rigid boundaries because it's a safety mechanism for them, right? But one thing that we should all strive to do, if we can, is to have some flexible boundaries, is to create flexible boundaries and be flexible. And so what that means is that we decide what to let in and what to keep out. We're resistant to emotional contagion and psychological manipulation, and these are the people that are difficult to exploit. Right? That doesn't mean that they're not willing to listen to others. It just means that they have a firm grasp over what they want to do and what they don't want to do. So let's take a look at what flexible boundaries looks like in action. We're going to watch a little video here. There's some video and audio on this one.
Get a party this weekend, my place. Bring booze, chips, and most importantly, yourselves.
Cool.
Oh, I can't make it on Friday. I agreed to help a friend move, and I don't know what time we're gonna be done.
Yeah, I wish I could go too, but my dad's in town. I gotta show him around the old city. You know how dads are.
Dads love cities.
They do.
Sure.
Well, bummer. Well, what about you, Quinta?
Oh, I can't go either because I don't want to.
I'm sorry. Do you have something to do?
No, I just don't want to go.
Is your dad in town and you have to take him around the city too?
Oh, no. My dad is living peacefully in Philadelphia. He hasn't visited in years. I just don't want to go.
You don't want to go because it's far away, because it's in Studio City, and that's a drive.
I actually live pretty close to Studio City in the Valley, yeah. I just don't want to attend the party.
I'm sorry, Quinta. Is this something I did?
Oh my God, Justin, no. Are you kidding me? You're a dear. You didn't do anything. I just would rather not and will not be attending your party.
Hold on. Is it because you have an improv class that night? That's what it is.
No, that's actually at 3:00 p.m. in the afternoon.
Oh, but that night you got roller derby. That's why you can't go.
Thank you so much for remembering, Steve. Such a doll, but that actually got canceled this weekend. Right.
Quinta, let me get this straight.
Yeah.
I'm having a party,
Yes.
and you are my friend,
I am.
and I invited you,
Thank you.
but
I am not going to that party.
What are you going to do instead?
What is your reason for not going to his party?
Oh, the reason that I am not going to Justin's party is that I do not want to go to Justin's party.
hold on. Let's figure this out.
Okay.
I invited you
Yes.
to a party, which means Quinta goes, right?
Okay, let me show you the problem with your logic there. Let me get that math just a little off. So, see what you did here, but what you forgot was X, which is I don't want to go, which then changes the outcome to I am not going.
Wait, what?
Simple math.
I get it. Quinta here is trying to pull a fast one on us. She's saying that she's not going to go. She's going to show up halfway through the party and yell surprise. It's an opposite surprise party.
That's genius.
Okay.
That is a really fun way to think of it, you guys. If the surprise is that I will not be there because I'm not going.
Come on. I'm having a party, and I invited you, and you're just not gonna go because you don't want to go? At least these guys came up with valid excuses. Right, guys? Steve?
I wish I could be as honest as Quinta. I'm not going because I don't want to go.
I mean, my dad actually is in town and wants to go see the city, but I mean, if he wants to go to your party, then maybe.
Hello, son.
Oh, hey, sir. Would you be interested in coming to my party?
No, I don't want to go to your party.
Great, right? Now, Quinta did a great job of exhibiting flexible boundaries, right? She was nice, she was kind, right? She wasn't angry or upset. She just was establishing that this is where her limit was. She actually didn't want to go to the party. And the first question that we often ask when we see something like that is, right, there's a big initial reaction, but isn't that rude? Right? And let's get it straight. Quinta was not being rude. She was just exhibiting flexible boundaries. She was being pleasant and accommodating, but deciding what she wanted to let in and what she wanted to keep out. So how do we do this, right? How do we actually put this into action at work, when we work with people, when we have colleagues, and we have coworkers, right? So there's a kind of a complex concept in this book, Boundaries, that we are responsible to others and for ourselves. And what that means is we are not responsible for others' feelings, right? In that video, lots of the other two guys wanted to go to Justin's party or said things that were lies to Justin because they didn't want to hurt his feelings. They took on the responsibility for his feelings, and instead of being responsible to him, they tried to be responsible for him and what he thought. And that's actually a violation of Justin's boundaries. Right? So it's a kind of a tricky thing. Now, one of the most common boundary violations is taking care of someone, and like maybe an aging parent or a relative or a friend or something like that. And those are the more dangerous situations because we want to be responsible for them. Right? And I think it's important to be clear about who we are responsible for. And those might be our kids or our parents if we are actually responsible for them, but not to our coworkers. So what do we do in those kinds of situations? Well, let's talk a little bit about that. This is New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. And when he was the mayor of Newark, New Jersey, he helped realize like really unprecedented violent crime reduction, and he helped increase affordable housing, like did a lot of great things for the city of Newark. And I was really fortunate to hear him speak at Brooklyn Beta a couple of years ago, 2012. And during the Q&A session, one person asked him, like, how do you make sure that your team is accountable, right? How do you make sure that, how do you get this success? And he attributed it to accountability. He said, well, my team is very accountable. And he gave a formula for accountability. This is what he said. This is how you make somebody accountable, right? There are 3 steps. So the first step in accountability is that every party must agree to the same standard, right? That's the first thing. The second thing, and we'll kind of talk about what this looks like in action. So here's an example, right? You might say to your boss or your manager or your client, this functionality will be done by the end of the day. Now, if you're talking to your manager, they might ask for more specificity because this is kind of vague, right? It's hard to measure what the standards actually are. So what are the standards? So how do you actually change this? Well, maybe you're more specific. Instead of saying this functionality, maybe it's more like the ability to upload documents will be done by the end of the day today. There's also some more vagueness in a statement like this, so maybe you're more specific about the time frame. The ability to upload a document will be done by 5 p.m. Eastern today. All right? Okay, so specificity helps in establishing accountability. All right, the next step is you need to be able to measure those standards, right? So how do you measure this? If we kind of go back to this statement, how do we measure this? Well, easy to measure. If at 5:01 today I cannot upload a document, that means that this is not finished. Right? So I think these are probably obvious things, and we all probably know about this stuff. But it's the third part of accountability that's the toughest one. It's the one that we all generally fall down on and really is hard to kind of follow through on. The third thing is that there need to be effects, right? Consequences, both positive or negative, right? For the things that you're accountable for. So define standards, how to measure those standards, but then something good that happens or something bad that happens as a result of that. And that's the part where most of us fall down on accountability. So here's an example, right? The ability to upload a document will be done by the end of the day today or 5 p.m. Eastern today. A positive outcome is if that happens, our client will be happy. A negative outcome is if that doesn't happen, our client probably won't renew the account. Right? So those are examples of how to keep someone accountable in the things that we're actually doing. All right? So again, define standards, system of measurements, and positive or negative consequences. So if your teams aren't being productive right now, the teams that you work on, there's probably a chance that your teams are not being held accountable, and this is a framework to kind of help correct that. Right? It's probably at least worth a shot. All right, so another way, sorry, I'm gonna jump back here. All right, there we go. So what I've seen is a lot of teams don't do well with this kind of standard. So once everybody is involved with this, some conversational cues can go a long way. If you're having trouble creating accountability, here's some conversational cues that you can use. All right, one thing here to create accountability is not mandating things, but actually asking for them, and that respects someone's boundaries. Instead of saying, this needs to be finished by 5 p.m. today, right, there's a lot of assumption there, you can ask, can you finish this by 5 p.m. today? Right, so now what if you're on the other end of this? What if your manager or your boss or your client comes to you and says, can you finish the document upload by 5 p.m. today? Well, there are 3 possible answers, and I would wager that most of us know the first 2. Right, so here are some examples of answers. Right, what's the most obvious answer, or what is one of the most obvious answers in this? What could you answer? Just yell it out. Yes, I can. Right, totally. Like, that's the first obvious answer. Can you finish the document upload? Yes, I can. And you probably can guess the second one. The second one is no, I cannot. Right? Those are probably expected answers. How about the third one? I don't know is a good guess. Another guess that most people would have is maybe. Now, the problem is those are actually not good answers to maintain accountability, right? So maybe not a great answer. I don't know. Maybe not a great answer. What's the third option that you get? Well, the third option is to commit to commit. Okay, so what does that mean? How do we commit to commit? What that looks like is, it's like this. It's 2 p.m. now. Can I tell you by 3 p.m.? Or I will tell you by 3 p.m. Right? So you're not committing to when it'll be done. You're committing to when it'll be done. Right? And that's a thing that we don't utilize as often as we probably could or probably should. And so that's a great way to extend the accountability, to say, I know I'm not on the hook right now, but I will give you a time where I can be put on the hook. Right? So that's a great technique. So here's an example. Can you finish the document upload functionality by 5 p.m. today? No, but I can get it to you by 6 p.m. Will that work for you? Right? And now the onus is back on the other person. Right? So it's this conversation about accountability so that you're linking to each other in how you're actually going to accomplish this work and get this work done. All right, last thing to kind of go over here is how many people do this? Actually, don't raise your hand. Under promise, over deliver. Right? We hear this a lot. Right? And on the surface, it seems pretty good. Right? You under promise, you tell the client that you're going to do this, and then you over deliver. Now, if you're doing this really toxic technique, please stop. Please stop doing this. And why am I asking you to stop? Well, I have another name for this. There's a different term that it's a technical term that we use for this in the industry, and the technical term for that is lying. Right? Don't lie to your clients. Don't lie to your bosses. Right? Let's take a look at how this works. Right? So you might say to your client at 3 p.m., "Hey, we're sorry, we're not going to have that page done by the end of the day." And the client's like, "All right, that's it's fine. I was kind of disappointed, but all right." And then at 5 p.m., you magically show up. Here's that new page. The client's like, I thought we weren't going to get this today. I guess that's cool, maybe, right? And you're like, but I gave them something. I gave them something they want, so that's got to be good, right? And now what's happening here that's the problem is that the client is now second-guessing your word, right? You did give them something that is valuable to them, but they don't know that they can trust what you say anymore. Right? You said we're not going to have this done, and now all of a sudden it's done. Now, what I'm not saying is you can't be wrong about stuff. You can totally be wrong about stuff. It's okay to make a mistake, but own that mistake, right? In the reply to them at 5 p.m., you might say, "Hey, client, I know I told you we weren't going to have this done today. We actually got it done sooner rather than later, so I know I promised it to you tomorrow instead. I could give it to you today if you'd like it. Would you like it today, or would you like me to wait until tomorrow?" And again, that's a respectful place with their boundaries that now it gives them the choice. It gives them consent to be able to accept that or wait till tomorrow and really for you to kind of go back on your word. Something exciting is happening. All right, so let's wrap this up here. What most of our teams are doing is we are trying not to be selfish, right? Which I think is pretty obvious, but this is a spectrum here that we can work on moving more toward, right? So where do our teams want to get to is for all of us to start being selfless to each other. That's what creates that psychological safety. So how do we do that? This is a great book. This is one of my favorite books. It's called Leaders Eat Last. And in the book, Simon Sinek, you might have heard Simon Sinek before. He does a talk, Start With Why. And he has a TED Talk, and it's a great book. I actually like this book a lot better. People just don't know about it as much. And it really gives so many tips and examples and stories about how people like us can start supporting our team members more. So in the book, for example, he gives a story of a company where an employee's wife had a terminal illness, and he didn't have enough vacation days to be out. So he basically said, well, I'm going to just take unpaid vacation, and it's going to be even more difficult for us because we have bills, but I have to do this for my family. And the employees of that company, what they did was they pooled together, and they said, we want to pool our vacation days and donate it to their family so that he can take the time off. And now HR did not have a policy for this. They were like, well, we don't even know how to do that. And yet the employees did it anyway, and they all threatened to strike unless HR enacted this. Right? That's what it looks like to create psychological safety. That's what it looks like to be selfless and to work for other people on your team. There's another story in that book. I'll just share one more and then kind of wrap up. There's another story in that book of a company called NextJump, and they have what's called a lifetime employment policy. It's a really, really well-vetted hiring process. But once you get hired, you cannot be fired unless you do something that's illegal, for example. Right? So what they do is, if you have performance problems, instead of getting fired or reprimanded, you automatically get a coach. Right? And think about what it would look like at your company if there was no such thing as getting fired, but instead you knew that if you perform poorly, you're just going to get coached to do better. Right? Think of how that changes the mindset of how you're actually working on what you're working on and how you're working with others. Last thing as we wrap up here, I think there's a great video that I saw recently that just shows how that actually works in action. It's a little bit of an analogy, but we'll kind of end on this. hopefully you've had some takeaways from this talk. If not, I'd like to suggest one more as we close here. When you get back to work on Monday or tomorrow or whenever you get back to work, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to ask your coworkers this question: what can I do for you today? Right? And it could be something small. It could be taking over some of their workload. It could be getting them a glass of water when they're thirsty. It doesn't have to be a large gesture, but this is how you start to create the culture.
Try to do if you can is by you taking the first flexible boundaries. So the first thing, really flexible boundaries and be flexible. And so what that means is we decide what to let in and what to leave out. We're resistant to emotional contagion and psychological manipulation. And these are the people that are difficult to exploit. Right? That doesn't mean that they're not willing to listen to others. It just means that they have a firm grasp over what they want to do and what they want to do. So let's take a look at what flexible boundaries looks like in action. We're going to watch a little video here.
In helping you to be good at work.